Hello and welcome to today's webinar, State of 911. My name is Lori and I'll be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. If you experience technical difficulties within the WebEx session, you may also contact WebEx technical support at 1-866-229-3239. Please note today's call is being recorded. We will be holding two Q&A sessions during today's presentation. During this time, you may ask a live question. To do so, you must be dialed in correctly and see a phone icon next to your name. If you do not have a phone icon, we will not be able to unmute your line during today's session. You will need to disconnect your phone and dial back in, making sure to enter your attendee ID number. At this time, if you would like to ask a live question, please use the raise hand feature below your name on the participant panel, and we will unmute each caller one at a time. You may also ask an online question throughout the presentation by clicking on the Q&A panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce your presenter for today, Colby Rackfall. Colby, you now have the floor.
Hello, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series being presented by the National 911 Program. My name is Colby Rackfall, and I am support for the program. This webinar series was designed to offer 911 stakeholders information about ongoing federal and state 911 and NG 911 projects and provide real experiences and best practices from early adopters about the NG 911 transition process currently underway across the country. Each webinar consists of a presentation from a federal level and a state level 911 stakeholder, with each being followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. If there is time remaining at the end of the event, we will open up the floor to all questions. Following the event, a recording of the presentation along with the slides will be posted to the National 911 Program's website, www.911.gov. You can also visit this site to find information on past and future events, as well as to learn more about the National 911 Program. We will begin today's event with a presentation from the 911 Wellness Foundation Chair, Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Jim Marshall, who will share special considerations for assuring optimal telecommunicator well-being and performance in the NG 911 PSAP, including a new nationwide strategic 911 employee wellness initiative. Following a Q&A with Mr. Marshall, Mr. David Hull, Deputy Director for Operations, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, will provide an overview of the Commonwealth and its PSAPs, including the development of regional initiatives, as well as share components of the Pennsylvania Roadmap to NG 911. Now I'd like to hand it off to Ms. Lori Flaherty, Coordinator for the National 911 Program.
Thanks, Colby. Usually during this first segment, we have someone from a federal agency presenting, but every once in a while there's an issue that is so prevalent at the national level that we decide to devote some time to it. And certainly the wellness of the 911 telecommunicator is one of those issues. While telecommunicators may not physically put themselves in harm's way, clearly it is a job that generates a lot of stress, and making sure that that doesn't turn into distress in terms of the telecommunicator is something that is really important to all of us. So although we as feds don't endorse any particular program or organization, we were really happy to get Jim Marshall to present today. As Colby said, he is the chairman of the 911 Wellness Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization devoted to fostering the health of 911 professionals. He also has a direct tie to those of us in the 911 realm in that his sister is a retired 911 telecommunicator. So, Jim, thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much. It's an immense pleasure, and really, we say this as presenters all the time, that things are a privilege, but it is a great privilege to be here because it represents a recognition by the industry, local, at state, and the federal level, that our dedication to the health and well-being of our 911 professionals has to translate into a greater depth of knowledge and support for them strategically, looking at how this unique 911 stress affects them. And so I'm grateful to be a part of State of the 911 webinar here, Lori. And so for folks who are joining us, I want to welcome your questions in the Q&A when we come down to that point. Again, those 10 minutes for that. And also afterwards as well, you feel free to email me at 911wellness@live.com. And as Lori said, really the privilege to be able to share the floor here is so important because we sit at a moment in time here in the industry, in 911 industry, where there's enormous opportunity. When we look at next generation 911, what we recognize is the chance to enrich the data that we receive and we share in the emergency response so that more lives can be saved, so there's more optimum performance for everybody. And part of the readiness for NG 911, as the National 911 Program Office and many of the leaders in this country recognize, including NENA and APCO and all of our state folks, and this conference that I'm at now here in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania NENA conference, we have people in this room, all of us sharing recognition that as we go forward, we not only need to be technologically ready for NG 911, and also without alarmism, without being alarmist, we need to recognize what the stresses are that can be a part of the migration to NG 911. And really, frankly, even if there were no NG 911, we need as an industry to recognize how already our people have been affected by stress in the legacy 911 console experience. And there's all of this really is about an optimistic recognition that we now have evidence-based solutions and preventive things that we can do. So there's no reason that our 911 professionals cannot not only rock the console, as they say, going forward in the next gen, but also be even healthier, even more vital, even more resilient than they are today. Really all that is required is that the tremendous level of dedication that I've experienced, not only a welcome as a mental health professional, but being embedded in this community. We have such great people, and we are now coming together at the next level to look at what we strategically can do. So I'm going to walk you through a few concepts here. The slides are just the assistance. They're not the main focus. But if I can advance the slides, we're going to move forward. So just by way of introduction here, we're looking at, when we talk about NG 911, the human-machine interface. And you'll notice I bolded the word human because certainly we need to recognize how to help that telecommunicator relate to the increased multitasking and the eventual, and we have texting here now, of course, in different states of readiness. We notice it probably is not flooding in as some feared that it would, that trickle in those places where it's begun. But the texting will represent opportunities and challenges for them, as well as real-time video, the sensor data that we can get. And so we want to be able to ask the questions with the right people in the room, the experts in the room, meaning 911, mental health, health science researchers. How do we make sure that the telecommunicator will be performing optimally and stay resilient in the midst of this change? The most natural human response when we look at change is that we do flip out a bit, we do get anxious. And no question there's been a certain level of that, and yet there is a lot of great planning. And so what we're looking at is advancing planning on the human side of the human-machine interface to make it occur at the same tempo as the technological advancement of NG 911. So the National 911 Program, as you guys know, I'm not representing them, but I'm recognizing that Lori Flaherty and her program coordinate private and public stakeholders at the local, state, federal levels with the goal of what? Optimizing 911 service to the nation. The Wellness Foundation, in a very similar way, is here to offer expertise to help all 911 stakeholders in their coordinated efforts to advance 911. Specifically, and here's the emphasis, in strategic planning to assure psychological well-being of our 911 pros and their peak performance of our telecommunicators. So the psychological health is directly tied to the ability to be peak performers. So by way of a very quick introduction to the 911 Wellness Foundation, it is a nonprofit that was begun in 2011 by a number of different stakeholders representing folks who are sitting in the console, frontline dispatchers, who I call the console SMEs, console subject matter experts, along with directors, mental health professionals like myself, and other people who are experts in behavioral organization. And so our mission is to partner with 911. Really, we're a service organization to come alongside the rest of our folks. So what does that mean? NENA, APCO, International Academies, Emergency Dispatch, all the groups out there that are working to serve the community. We're just lending a style of expertise to marry it with theirs so that we're ready and doing great work. The foundation achieves this through 4 streams of activity. And what do we mean? Well, the mission flows in and through research. What does that mean? We want to be able to understand what is happening there for telecommunicators already in terms of psychophysiological impacts of stress in the work they do, and what can we learn about how to optimize their performance and keep them healthy. Also research into what are the most effective ways to keep people resilient. We also are just encouraging and supporting research that others are doing. We're concerned absolutely with conducting our own. And by the way, the emphasis is not finding more and more problems. It's recognizing what is there as challenges, but also proactively building solutions. This is very positive outreach. And I'm going to share a little bit of research with you in a little bit from Michelle Lilly from Northern Illinois University, who is making phenomenal contributions. So the foundation also supports the research initiative of others. And the script there in the red basically summarizes what I've just said. Education is one of our streams of activity, and what does that mean? Well, for all 911 stakeholders, there's different kinds of education that's needed to boost science-driven planning and local PSAP practices that will secure wellness and peak performance. So that's not only training for frontliners, but it's really helping all of us know who are stakeholders who together come alongside to look at achieving these gains for 911 and wellness. Advocacy, really, and policy. So what we're looking at is helping shape local, state, and federal policy and industry standards for best practice in PSAP operation in healthcare. Now that sounds like a blur, but what I'm speaking about here is, for example, I'm from Michigan. I work with our PSAPs in Michigan, and we're looking together, Harriet Miller Brown, who's also the president of NASNA this year, the National Association of State 911 Administrators. We're looking at how we in the foundation can support the work that they're doing with their CLEAR committee. We're just at the very beginning there, but that's an example. The NENA standard on acute, traumatic, and chronic stress management is another example of policy that we want to support, be a part of contributing to, and then implementing. I'll introduce that in a minute. And then prevention and intervention. So what are we talking about? We want to maximize the access that every telecommunicator and their leaders have to evidence-based therapy and training to address 911 stress and, again, to foster resilience. I can't speak in length here about this, but there is evidence-based treatment that I've been using as a clinician since 1990. It's one of the 3 approved by the Department of Defense. Every 911 telecommunicator needs to know about EMDR. I'll be sharing that at the conference on that right now. But so we want to get the word out, and we're working with those organizations that are responsible for providing this treatment to be sure that our folks can get that. Okay, so what's happening? What are the challenges that are facing 911 that we can do good stuff about together? Well, we know some of what's happening because research is helping us do that. I mentioned Michelle Lilly, Dr. Lilly from NIU. Here's what she found in her most recent study. The data has not yet been published. She presented at NENA in part with me in a presentation and then laid all of it out briefly in her presentation. She shared with me a few bits of data which I want to share with all of you. This is quite striking. This is a preliminary look at experienced participants. What are we talking about? Telecommunicators with between 1 and 20 years with an average of 12+ years of experience, right? And so what percentage of them were identified in this study as having signs consistent with PTSD? Let me emphasize that you can't diagnose folks in a study like this. They took a screening tool which points to the probability by answering questions. Now, these are 808 telecommunicators, and what she found was that if we're using a civilian cutoff score that's not quite as stringent as a military cutoff score for answering those questions, 24.6% of those folks, or 199s, acknowledge symptoms consistent with the diagnosis of PTSD. That's about 1 in every 4. If we're using military cutoffs, it's 17.6%. So what is the reality? We can't know with certainty, but this study is bringing us closer because it's a very good study. So that's PTSD. That's an issue. What about depressive symptoms in people? What about the levels of depression? Well, we know from her study that 24% had symptoms that were moderate to severe related to clinical depression. Let me just emphasize one thing. There would be a right concern that if we announce that, wow, all these people have PTSD out there, now great, now we're talking about disability and people, you know, and everybody ending up sick. No. The reality is there, and there's no reason for people to be on a permanent or a long-term extended disability with PTSD because there's treatment that can cure it. So this does not end up being an excuse. It becomes a reality we face and we treat and get people back out there on those at the console to do their job. Likewise with depression, very treatable. What about obesity in 911? Dr. Lilly's finding is quite striking. Now, I'm not giving you all the data that she found, and she's going to be developing this much more herself. But what she found was, if you look at the data, 15.7% were normal in body mass index, 29.6% were overweight, 54.7% are obese. Okay, so now 88% of those folks want to lose weight, and 53% reported having gained weight in just the last 3 months. We know and we've known that this is an issue in the industry, and of course, diseases are related highly correlated to body mass index. So these are challenges that we do face. Now the issue is, what are we going to do about it? And the good news is we are well on our way. NENA has taken a leadership role with folks that are from APCO, from PowerPhone, from all these organizations, vendors, mental health professionals, frontline dispatchers, all came together to write the NENA standard. And I'm going to just quickly, as you know, I'm talking very quickly, but we're covering a lot of important ground right here, right now with this. So the NENA standard on acute traumatic and chronic stress states this: all PSAPs shall develop comprehensive stress management programs, or CSMPs, to include what? Well, training in stress management, on-site educational materials about stress, different kinds of stress-related things that can happen and what to do about it, critical incident stress management, which includes but is not only debriefing, it's more expansive than that, identifying local trauma therapists that can provide support that's really qualified. It's good that we have employee assistance programs, but we have to link those with trauma therapists so that our folks get the help they need. Employee assistance programs, which most of our folks do have in place, they need to be able to use those. And then peer support programs, like in Charleston, South Carolina, they've done a wonderful job training the folks to come alongside others in their PSAP, not for even just horrible major things, but anything that they need support with. This is to improve retention, to assure that health is good. Ongoing certification training in those areas where mastery of calls can decrease stress. So, for example, suicide call management, managing barricaded gunmen. The less people are trained, the more distress they're going to have, and vice versa. They can do much better managing stress when they are properly trained. And there's an initiative, of course, that, at the national level working on that. Personal health incentivizing programs, just encouragement for people to do the exercise, to get out and have a balanced lifestyle with nutrition, exercise. So that is the NENA standard. And now, part of what I need to say that the 911 Wellness Foundation is devoted to is coming alongside NENA and all of our stakeholders to help our PSAPs implement that standard. It doesn't have to be costly, but they do need the resources and the support to do that. So it's one thing to have it standard, another thing to implement it. That standard, really, folks, the foundational block, it's the cornerstone for the rest of what we can do to prepare also for next generation 911. And so what are we doing to address the challenges as new initiatives? Well, we're promoting strategic planning, and the we is these stakeholders that I'm speaking to. The Wellness Foundation is just a part of that. So the NENA Working Group on Task Overload is a new initiative, and they're looking at how much is too much and what do we do to avoid hitting the tilt so we master and help our dispatchers manage the stress at the console. In 2012, 2 issues of the Call magazine for NENA were devoted to wellness. That's just a reflection. APCO's much on this, and it's very encouraging for all of our people to see that the resources are there. And then the Wellness Foundation has alliances with NENA, with the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch, specifically devoted to looking at how we will help the rest of the industry advance. And all of this is to achieve crucial benefits. And what am I talking about? Well, first, assuring that the future viability of PSAP ops are really optimal, right, including risk management, retention of qualified 911 pros, morale and adaptation to change, and cost effectiveness. We certainly going to save money. So these are the benefits we hope to achieve by what? By strategic planning towards a blueprint. What we're proposing is that we bring folks together strategically to look at designing a blueprint. This is a document that guides us in all areas of looking at wellness, leading us into the future, that would be integrated into our planning and the development of NG 911. So we have people who are very excited about doing this work and very qualified from a variety of different disciplines within and beyond the 911 industry. So that's the goal there, bringing together console SMEs in that effort, public and private sector people, 911 vendors of technology and ops support, and health science experts, organizational leadership and behavior people. So there's a lot of progress being made, and we hope that folks will want to be a part of that, excited about what's going on. And that is it. We want to be able to predict and plan for management of stressors, define training needs to equip the 911 professional. As part of this blueprint, we want to identify optimal PSAP processes and practices. And I'm thinking that we're going to do this, all of us together, and we welcome folks to be participating. If you want more information, at least participating with me in this as Chair, CEO of the Foundation, you can see information on the screen right there. And at this time, I'll open it up to questions and answers if we have any. I think we're still connected. We're just inviting people to offer those questions. Don't be hesitant to put those in even now.
Jim, this is Lori Flaherty. I have a question for you. If folks are trying to figure out how to get started, where to go, how to find information, do you have any suggestions for folks? I just noticed that there's information on the screen right now, but anything you could share with us in terms of how people might get started on this would be really useful.
Absolutely, Lori. So we can be very direct about that. The 911wellness.com website is there as a resource for our leaders. You know, when I think about 911 leaders around the country looking at implementing the comprehensive stress management programs called for by the NENA standard, that can be one more major stressor for them. But what we want to do is make this simple, get the information out there. If you go to 911wellness.com, you'll see that when you scroll down on the first page, I offer an introductory article that gives you links, including to the PDF of the document itself, the NENA Stress Standard, and then more helpful information about how to go forward, as well as my personal contact information. And I welcome calls from leaders to guide them in the first steps of beginning to implement that, as well as it may not be the NENA Stress Standard they want to talk about. They might find that in their center they're dealing with struggles in a particular major area. For example, with people who are maybe with more capacity or burnout. I'm happy to field those questions. I'm connecting people almost every day around the country to getting good mental health support and assistance, and helping leaders find trauma therapists to embed in their EAPs. So they can either email me, which is up on the screen, call me, and by all means go to 911wellness.com. And then I will route them to lots of other resources that are out there as well. I don't know, does that answer your question, Lori?
Absolutely, thank you.
You bet. Any other questions?
Hi, Jim, this is Colby Rackfall. What kind of outreach do you conduct to promote 911 wellness?
Well, that's a really good question. A number of different means for this. This is happening, if we look at the federal level, national conferences, presentations, publications. So in our journals, in a variety of different journals, a number of people, more and more people within the Wellness Foundation and beyond are writing articles about the challenges and also the solutions related to the different kinds of stress, but also boosting resilience, as well as the websites. And then also we have, in terms of getting the word out, we have a lot of people at the state levels now who are offering conference presentations and getting people to know via those state conferences. We have materials being prepared by 911 PSAPs, leader PSAPs. In other words, those who are they're early adapters in addressing these problems. They're sharing information as well. And then also for anyone who is interested in the 911 community, the 911 Wellness Foundation has a Facebook page, which, and I know in some places at work, Facebook is not permitted. We understand that, but we do welcome anyone who wants to be a part of that to request to join, and there's support there and information on that as well.
Great.
Yeah, and one of the questions that I get often is when we're talking about trauma therapy, what kind of resource is there, because we want to be able to prevent, not just treat. And there is a treatment called EMDR. EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And this treatment is one of only 3 approved by the Department of Defense for treatment of PTSD. It also works wonderfully with a lot of other struggles, including depression. Just in the last week, I've had 2 calls from different PSAPs. One call was from a director saying, I've got somebody in my office. This dispatcher handled a terrible suicide call a year ago. Last Thursday, this was on a Monday when she called me, she said last Thursday she took a call. I'm not going to go into gory details, none of us needs that, but she said a mother was preparing the car to camp. Her 18-year-old daughter was in the garage and there was a fatal accident. This dispatcher was completely unraveled. What do we do for our people in that moment? So we bridge them to this EMDR treatment. There's people all over the country, and what we're working at is a national registry of EMDR therapists for 911 who understand 911 because we're educating them, as well as they're willing to do sit-alongs, show some humility to learn from the people who they will serve in treatment. So we also have links on the website to a lot of other resources, including critical incident stress management. So, any other questions?
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Marshall. Ms. Flaherty will now introduce Mr. David Hull, Deputy Director for Operations, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency.
Thanks, Colby. I'm really happy to tell you that David Hull is on the line with us today to do a presentation on what Pennsylvania is doing in terms of next generation 911. David's the Deputy Director for Operations for Pennsylvania's Emergency Management Agency, and some of the things that they're doing are not only innovative, but particularly collaborative in terms of how they're moving forward. And I feel lucky that we have you today, David, so thank you so much for agreeing to participate. Go ahead. Are you there, David?
Hello?
There you go.
Oh, okay, great. Well, again, thank you for the invitation to be a part of the webinar series. I know that I think collaboration, the word that you use, is probably the one that best suits where we are and where we're going in Pennsylvania. I know that across the country there's a variety of different approaches that are being taken to the evolution of next generation 911. So we're helpful that the Pennsylvania experience and our path forward may benefit someone who may be struggling either regionally, locally, or else on a statewide basis. So we're going to talk a little bit about where Pennsylvania was 3 short years ago. So next slide, if we could. Just to give you kind of an overview, Pennsylvania has a population of just shy of 13 million people. It's a land area of about 46,000 square miles. There are 67 counties, and if you drive from north to south, it's about 170 miles, and east to west, 283 miles. So it's a fairly substantial size of a state as well. And within that's the PSAP community. Next slide. In the 911 program in Pennsylvania, in the last 10 years, has seen over 80 million 911 calls, just shy of 9 million calls to the 69 PSAPs were reported last year in 2013. We've seen wireless calls since 2007 increase from about 45% to almost 70%. I think that's probably what most of the experience has been in PSAPs around the country as well. Wireless keeps going up. Wireline keeps going down, conversely. They've decreased from about 55% to around 30% during that same period. Next slide. So the PSAP environment essentially back in 2011 was very stovepipe, proprietary, independent 911 systems operating in a variety of silos. And that's essentially because that's the way the legacy system around the country and the technology kind of required them to be. So there were, as I said earlier, 69 public safety answering points. We have, of the 67 counties, there are 2 cities that are under our state act currently that were grandfathered into that, so there are 69 total. Limited or no ability to share was the situation that we were in 3 short years ago. Public safety data, radio, call processing information, or the inability to transfer calls from PSAP to PSAP. There were multiple platforms, limited access, and as a result, very limited situational awareness for first responders across those PSAPs. We had rising costs of infrastructure, exponentially rising costs in some areas, with simultaneous reductions in funding. Wireline, last year alone, we saw a total of about $50 million in reductions in wireline over the last 10 years. It's particularly impacting steady annual decline as well. So we needed a path forward. Next Gen, as part of that path, was needed. Next slide. So in discussions, we came up with a vision, essentially, because we looked at the component parts, we looked at NENA, we looked at the evolution of Next Gen across the country, and we found 5 basically component parts to a statewide development of regional interconnected systems. The first, and I think the one that was the foundational that we needed before anything, was the ESI deployment. And then with that, very closely coupled, was the security of that ESInet. Then also as the ground foundational piece for routing of calls was the GIS, the data, the ECRF functions, and then telephony was another, and then applications, certainly interoperable applications was yet another. These were not necessarily suggested to be linear developed, but rather parallel implementations in many ways as we move forward. And each had its own component part. Each followed the NENA I3 standard moving forward for each of their areas. So next slide. So we needed to design and develop an internet protocol-based, IP-based network, an ESInet, at the regional and the state enterprise levels that were dedicated to public safety service applications and the Next Gen 911 interconnectivity. Using that roadmap, we looked at a system of systems, ESInet. We took a look at what was needed to leverage as planned systems from currently operating things. So we take the patchwork legacy system that may be out there, and we build upon that to collaborate and build regions, and then we can interconnect in that system of system deployment. So we needed a pilot to start the concept and to incentivize some early developers. Next slide. And thankfully, we had the NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, had awarded a grant to PEMA. It was $2.45 million in grant funds. It had a 50% match, and that was applied through multiple county wireless and wireline funds. It was a commitment to have it completed when we initially looked at this by September of 2014. So our goal was to deploy an interoperable multi-county regional network in an operational environment as an ESInet. And it was to fully comply with the grant number 1, to implement a public safety grade ESInet that did support the multiple applications ultimately and enable cost-effective network sharing, and then also to develop a sustainable funding model beyond the grant period. Next slide. Region 13, which was one of our 9 task force regions, came to PEMA and said they would be interested in being part of that pilot project. Originally, there were 8 PSAPs that were scoped to be a part of the pilot. It developed into 14 PSAPs, which was one additional on top of the Region 13 counties. So the goal was to tie into a contiguous regional state system of systems enterprise network at strategic points, and then develop a regional micro fiber-based backbone with microwave ESInet supports to include that WestCORE CPE application. So the network component had to come first, and then the CPE component would be layered on top of that. Next slide. We saw the benefits and the opportunities, and then you can see graphically kind of depicted where that 14-county region fits in. You see Beaver and Washington are not originally part of the CPE component, but they will be part of. They're part of the network, and eventually will be layered into the CPE piece as well. But we were to replace the end-of-life CPE components with IP-enabled next-gen capable CPE and reduce the number of CPE switches down from 13 to 3. The second piece to that was to enable disaster recovery and continuity of operations. And then the third part was to share recurring costs across multiple funding sources. In Pennsylvania, we have 911 surcharges. Also, some DHS grants were used for this project, as well as some county funds as well. Next slide. So this became the WestCORE regional approach. It's to use the ESInet to create, as I had said, the host remote CPE solution regionally, and then ultimately potentially statewide. But the original cost would have been, with the upgrade of 169 positions, of almost $10 million as a capital investment, with an annual operating expense of just over $500,000 a year. What came into play with the investment into the regional next-gen 911 capable CPE was a $5.1 million, roughly 50% reduction in the capital investment, and a $392,000 annual operating expense, so significant savings. The reduction of over $4.3 million in capital costs and $173,000 in annual operational expenses as well were anticipated. So in the next slide, the WestCORE project provided the baseline approach. It was 621 non-next-gen capable positions that currently existed statewide. It was a cost of CPE, of replacement upgrade legacy, of $30.6 million is what we had estimated and looked at, and then a $5.5 million annual operating expense versus what we could anticipate to be from a statewide next-gen 911 capable CPE sharing network of approximately $16.8 million and $3.3 million in annual operating expenses. So what we anticipated was a reduction of over $13.7 million in capital costs and $2.48 million in annual operating costs. Again, for sharing of equipment and sharing of expenses instead of the individual approach, the siloed approach. Next slide. The second essentially region that came to life and moved forward pretty rapidly was the Northern Tier region. Originally, it was 8 county PSAPs that needed to replace their 911 systems due to the end-of-life notifications. 1 county needed to refresh their 911 system hardware. So the goal was to develop systems that these were not next-gen 911 capable. They were not redundant. They were not interconnected. They couldn't transfer any alley between PSAPs, and they could not automatically route to other PSAPs if they had call overflow or system failure. So the average cost for replacement was $395,000, and that totaled a regional cost of just over $3 million. The average maintenance cost would have been about $45,000 per county for a new system. Next slide. So the Northern Tier project now we went from 8, there are now 10 counties in the northwest part of Pennsylvania, and you can see graphically how it sits just above WestCORE, comprising between those 2 regions about 1/3 of Pennsylvania. The region itself is about 7,700 square miles, over 660 residents, and they receive about 3.4 million calls in 2012. So their solution was a 39-position regional next-gen 911 capable telephony system, 1 system, which was geodiverse, shared between all counties, and then the average county yearly maintenance ended up being less than $22,000, so that's a savings of about $24,000 a year, which is significant. Next slide. So this whole regionalization strategy that we have moved forward with is essentially to reduce costs by reducing excess capacity. There were roughly 850 positions in Pennsylvania PSAPs with CPEs that were capable of handling in those 69 PSAPs of about 10,500 positions. The CPE positions, and largely because legacy required it to be that way, it was significantly overbuilt in terms of capacity capability. And as a result of that, costs associated with that were high as well. Each PSAP had an independent CPE when we started this project, or these projects. WestCORE Northern Tier regional projects reduced that CPE to shared capacity, and there were significant cost savings associated with that. So the other piece was to develop shared systems, deployment of common communications platforms to strengthen interconnectivity and interoperability among regional partners. And that would be shared CAD, shared telephony, shared logging recorders, shared GIS, and shared LMR. In the Northern Tier, we've seen that. Just within the last 2 weeks, we had a weather system come through the Northern Tier, which 2 counties received outages, and those calls were automatically picked up by a third county involved in the routing process. So they've achieved some major successes in being able to overcome some of the obstacles that are part of the legacy system with their shared telephony and CPE. Next slide. So in order to promote this, and you can kind of see the depiction across Pennsylvania. You see the WestCORE in the southwest, the Northern Tier we just been talking about in the northwest, and then a number of other regions that have developed. What we did was we went to the PSAPs and we said, you know, using the collaboration word again, you know who your best neighbors are, you know who you work with, you know what's going to be the best regionally for you in terms of developing systems and working partnerships. Come together, have a discussion, and determine who you want to partner with as a region, and make a commitment as a region. Come to us, and we will fund regional shared services assessment programs through the state 911 office. So to date, you see the regions that have made those commitments. We have over $1.8 million has been designated for those assessments. And essentially what we did was we sent out an assessment. Basically, it was a data form that said these are the things that we need to be included so we can start to compare across regions. We can see what your capabilities are and where we need to go from a planning perspective in order to build the system of systems. Who has what networks can interconnect, and where are the gaps associated with that. 50% of the eligible funding was paid upon agreement to participate upon receipt of the letter with regional partners, and then at the completion of that, and when we receive that their assessment, then the other 50% was paid after the assessment was reviewed and approved for including all the component parts that were requested. So next slide, please. So that becomes essentially the next Gen 911 continued path forward. Incentivize the regions to build out their ESInet platforms, system by systems, network by network, converge those networks and systems together, implement next Gen 911 capable PSAPs, and implement statewide next Gen 911 geographic-based routing and database integration. We know that's one of the fundamental pieces that we'll have to use moving forward. And then implement the next Gen 911 capable interoperable applications based upon the NENA standards as well. So ultimately, that's where we are. We have a third of the state moving in a really good direction. And if you take a look at the Southeast as well, in the previous map, the Southeast actually has a very robust program moving forward, developing ESInet plans, developing application sharing plans. The Northeast is moving forward in those discussions as well, as is a number of the other regions out there that you saw depicted on that previous map. So that's kind of where we're moving and kind of where we're heading, and seems to be moving forward at a pretty good pace. So next slide. Would entertain any questions that anybody has.
David, this is Lori. While we're waiting for folks to ask questions, I have one. Can you talk a little bit about who you had to convince to move forward with this plan in the initial phases and how that worked?
Sure. Actually, in the initial phases, we had Region 13 come to us and say they were interested in participating. I mean, NextGen was nothing new. It was something that was being talked about, but I think the interesting part is that when we first started talking about it, what we heard essentially from a lot of folks was, you know, it won't happen in my career. It's something that yeah, sure, I read about it. I hear there's a lot of publications, but it just isn't going to happen. So we started the conversation. We talked to NENA within the state, APCO within the state. We did some presentations early on talking about the plan to move forward. We said collaboration is the key, that everybody needs to come together, and you need to solve the problem regionally in some ways. Well, we'll provide incentives and guidance at the state level, working with all of our stakeholders. And there were early adopters that came forward that seized the opportunity. And then there were others that through the whole process began to realize that, you know, this is something that's going to happen. And with some of the latest discussions, you know, from some of the phone companies about some of the wireline pilots for removing the wireline and eventually within a short time potentially shutting down COs. We saw the wireline drop off. We knew that the IP world was not just something that was going to happen within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years beyond many of our careers. It was going to be something that was going to happen right now. So I think that the merging of the reality to the everyday practice became something that people started looking at and going, and stakeholders and the 911 directors and all the folks that were part of the process started saying, this isn't something that's you know, 5 years, 10 years down the road. This is something that we really need to take a look at and deal with. And as a result, as you saw, a third of the Commonwealth is in fact, even more than that actually, but a third's relatively in place to move forward. And I see on the heels of that, a number of the other regions moving forward pretty progressively as well.
Joe Barrows, your phone is unmuted if you'd like to ask a question.
Can you hear me?
Hey,
yes,
Joe.
sir, we can.
Hi, David.
Hi, Joe.
Listen, I've been meeting with the governor's office and trying to talk with them about a mountain network, if you will, since they're up there doing some fiber and some stuff, and a regional network there. So I'd be interested in if you could share your regional shared services assessment document. That may help me organize the effort. So is that something you can share?
Yep, absolutely. I'd be happy.
Yeah, just send it to me, email it to me or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Works.
Absolutely, Joe.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I want to do. If I didn't ask you now, I'd forget, or I'd get busy doing something else. So.
All right,
anyway,
sounds good.
Thank you.
Sure.
David, we have a question from the Q&A box. What is the largest size PSAP in these regions, and did you consolidate PSAPs within your region?
That's actually an excellent question. There was a study that was done by our state legislature called the LBFC study, Legislative Budget Finance Committee, and one of the things that they had talked about there was consolidation of PSAPs, even though one of the statements was Pennsylvania, compared to some of the other states in the country, is relatively consolidated. Our position has been that we will not, we don't talk about consolidation of PSAPs. We talk about regionalization, and we leave the decision as to whether or not a county wants to join other counties in regionalized efforts up to those counties. So essentially, it's what we're interested in is saving costs through regional equipment sharing initially, and it becomes a local decision as to whether or not they want to do any type of consolidation. There's been no consolidation of PSAPs currently. There is, when you take a look at some of the counties already have contracts or intergovernmental agreements with other counties to answer their calls. One county in particular split between two other counties. and it largely is based upon call volume and service costs. So there are cases where there are, and I wouldn't even call that a consolidated as much as shared services, but by and large, we've left that up to the individual 911 and the county authorities to determine what's in the best interest of their counties moving forward.
And what is the largest size PSAP in these regions?
The largest size PSAP is probably the city of Philadelphia, the county of Philadelphia. I don't have the exact statistics on that, but that's probably the largest, and they are working with the Southeast at this point, the Southeast region. But I think that PSAP, as well as the Allegheny County PSAP out in the WestCORE area, are probably the two of the largest PSAPs that handle the largest number of call volumes in terms of PSAPs themselves.
Okay, David, this is Lori one more time. In terms of the counties working together, can you talk a little bit about any kind of agreements or governance structure that they had to agree to in order to work together? How exactly did that happen?
Sure. Some of them basically. We in Pennsylvania, we have the ability for them to enter into intergovernmental agreements, and I know in the Northern Tier project, that's essentially what they did. There's certain criteria that have to be laid out based upon the intergovernmental agreement statutes that say these are the things we agree to do, and each of them has essentially in the WestCORE area, they've worked that out through their task force. Their task force group in terms of those governance agreements. In the Northern Tier, they actually had a document they circulated among them. So again, we've pretty much tasked the regions to say, you need to decide how you're going to work together. We at the enterprise level will assist you in doing that. We'll provide whatever guidance that we can do. But at a local level, when you get to the operations piece, it's PSAP to PSAP communicating, and what we need to do is develop the ability for them to do that in a next-gen world, and essentially provide the support and resources. But the actual PSAP to PSAP at this point and intergovernmental agreements is on a county-to-county and/or PSAP to county agreement methodology.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Hull, and thanks again to Mr. Marshall. And thank you all for attending today's presentation. We look forward to your participation in future State of 911 webinars. The date and presenters for the next webinar will be shared later this month. Again, for more information on the National 911 Program or to view a recording of this or past events, please visit our website at www.911.gov. Thanks again.
Ladies and gentlemen, that now concludes today's webinar. You may disconnect your lines.